It began several months back, when me and my best friend Jack were in a car accident. I would like to say the wreck wasn't my fault, but my blood alcohol levels would suggest otherwise. We've all made bad choices. Mine just cost me a broken arm, while Jack, who was unbuckled, was sent flying through my windshield. When I had regained my consciousness, I scrambled out of the vehicle to check on my friend, who I was almost certain had just died. However, to my surprise, I found him standing up, seemingly unharmed, other than some scrapes. Of course, I am happy that Jack survived. However, the likelihood that he would be sent flying through my windshield while driving over 60 miles per hour and be unharmed is nothing to overlook. But what was more worrying were the noticeable changes in his behavior that occurred after this. Jack still seemed to be himself, but he seemed to develop a bit of an edge to him. He started getting into fights when we went out, and he seemed to just have less care for his own well-being. And I suppose being in a near-death experience could explain this behavioral change. About 2 weeks ago, he dropped contact with me entirely. It was pretty abrupt, and I could pinpoint no reason for this. If he was mad about the crash, he would have cut ties then, but everything seemed normal, besides his sudden change in behavior. And then all of a sudden, his number wasn't working anymore, and he stopped showing up to work. I wouldn't blame anyone for quitting the crappy fast food joint where he had worked at, but considering Jack had also dropped out of college, I was suspecting the worst. A few days ago, after getting off after midnight from work, I decided enough was enough. I had to check on him. I pulled up to his apartment building without notice, aiming to catch him there, hopefully alive. Walking up to his door, I took a deep breath, then knocked. There was no answer. I knocked again several times before trying the door. To my surprise, it opened. The place was a mess. Fast food, trash, and junk strewn about. This wasn't too abnormal, but as I investigated further, I noticed there were large, claw-like marks in the walls and mangled furniture scattered everywhere. Going to check Jack's computer, I found that it too was also damaged beyond repair. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed a business card lay on the computer desk. It was for a bar supposedly in town, known as Barry Bones. A small logo of a skull wearing a top hat, while winking accompanied the name. Despite living here for the better part of a decade, I had not heard of this place once. Either way, I took it as my only clue, and headed straight there. It was a short 8-minute drive from Jack's apartment. I pulled into the mostly empty street, as most of the shops along Main Street were closed at this hour. It certainly didn't help my nerves to see how isolated I was if something did go wrong. I looked up at the small bar, which I have never seen before, and it was marked by the same silly skeleton icon. Barry Bones. What a stupid name. I had parked about a quarter mile from the bar, and just observed it for a bit. It didn't seem to be open, like everything else at this hour. There was at least one other floor above the main bar. I probably should just go home, I thought to myself. Do I really think Jack would be at some corny bar at 2 o'clock in the morning, all on his own? Honestly, I had begun rationalizing to myself, trying to find a way not to enter the building. I had a slight, but growing feeling of dread creeping upon me, yet I couldn't place my finger on the source. That's when I saw Jack. He was walking along the sidewalk about half a mile from the building. He looked rough, his stubble grown out and sunken, tired eyes. His brown hair was in a jagged mess, yet his face seemed stern and determined. He was wearing a trench coat, jeans, and what appeared to be combat boots. Needless to say, not his typical attire. I continued to hide out in my vehicle, hoping he wouldn't recognize it. Jack must have walked from his apartment to here, hence why I beat him to the spot. He approached the building and placed his palm on the front door, as if inspecting it. After a moment, he pushed it open and just walked into the bar. Well, I guess it's open, I muttered to myself. But Jack was in there, and I hadn't seen him for weeks. I was not going to leave just because of a bad feeling. when my best friend could be in danger. I worked up the courage, making sure I had my pocket knife on me. Then I stepped out of my vehicle. Walking up to the building cautiously, I noticed the bar doors were beaten down and made of wood, like in an old Western movie. Pushing them open, I was met with a pretty standard-looking bar, with scattered tables and light-up signs of various beer brands on the wall. Although the power was clearly out, and a thick layer of dust told me that no one had put a drink back here in years. Taking steps slowly into the room, I examined for a sign of where Jack may have gone. That's when I heard rustling behind the bar. I slowly crept around the bar into the kitchen. It was too dark to make out much of the room, but I could see the counter in the center of it, with some empty bottles and junk scattered about. I stopped completely as I heard what sounded like huffing and panting from behind the counter. I pulled out my phone slowly and walked around to the counter, turning up the flashlight app on my phone. I was frozen in terror as the source of the noise turned to look at me. The creature had pale yellow skin and lanky limbs. Its face was hard to discern besides the gaping mouth, full of large, rotting incisors, which were smeared with what I presumed to be blood. It was likely fresh too, as I noticed the body of the creature was hunched over. Not wanting to be the next meal for the abomination, I sprinted out of the kitchen and leapt over the bar. Before I could turn towards the front door, the monster had leapt onto me, pinning me to the ground. Drool fell onto my face as I attempted to push it off, but to no avail. The creature opened its mouth yet again, revealing its jagged teeth. I couldn't reach my pocket knife, so with no other options, I shoved my forearm into his face. I knew one bite to my neck or chest would be enough to kill me, so I figured my forearm would be a better trade. But considering its teeth were the size of steak knives, it wouldn't buy me much time. Before I could tear apart my arm, however, a gunshot rang out, and the bullet went through the creature's neck. It turned towards the one who was firing, and so did I. There was Jack, holding some sort of pistol. While I was relieved he was not the corpse the creature was feeding on earlier, I soon realized the monster was now sprinting towards him. I'd almost rather him have been dead than to have to watch him die right in front of me. But to my utter shock, the creature leapt over the counter, and Jack raised his leg effortlessly, kicking the creature in the jaw and sending it flying. He jumped over the counter, running at it before it even landed. When the creature crashed into a table, smashing it to bits, Jack placed his foot on its neck to pin it down. He fired 3 more shots into its head before it finally stopped struggling. Then he took a deep breath and looked back at me. "You shouldn't be here, Nathan." He looked very upset while he said this. I didn't know what to say. My best friend disappears for 2 weeks, and when I go looking for him, he tells me to get lost. I stood up slowly and walked over to him. "Jack, I have no idea what's going on. You haven't even called. Did you expect me not to look?" Jack looked upset, like he wanted to tell me something but he couldn't. Then he made eye contact with me and placed his hand on my shoulder. "You need to leave here, Nathan. This is too dangerous for you to be here. I doubt that was the only one." Before I could respond, Jack screamed out in pain. A large bony appendage protruded through his chest from behind him, causing him to spit out blood. He was then flung into the bar, smashing it on impact. The creature, still alive, looked at me. At least I think it was. I got a better look at it this time. Its head was smooth, with no clear features beside its mouth, and it hunched over, letting its gangly arms hanging forward. On its back were multiple, spider-like limbs which hadn't been there before. The monster stood over me, at least 7 feet in height. I swear, it seemed to be getting bigger, like it was evolving in front of me. All this was too much to consider, on top of the fact that Jack was likely dead. I had no time to mourn, however, as I grabbed a bar stool and swung it towards the creature's head. While mostly futile, it bought me just enough time to run a few feet before being stabbed through the leg by one of its bony appendages. I screamed out in pain, falling over as, yet again, the monster loomed over me like a cat toying with its prey. Still, I pathetically attempted to back away. There was no time to think about all the strange things that had led up to this moment. And there was no time to react as the much larger, humanoid beast grabbed it by the back of its neck, causing it to shriek in pain. A large, muscular monster with charcoal black hide and demonic horns stood over the faceless yellow creature as the sound of bones snapping and popping rang out. The demon breathed heavily, its glowing red pupils staring directly at the now helpless creature. Then, in one swift motion, the black beast swung the creature in the air and back down towards the ground, shattering its entire head at once. The beast then proceeded to start eating it. I quietly crawled to a table, using it to stand myself up and look towards the bar. I had to see if maybe Jack had survived. When I saw Jack's body no longer, I turned back to the larger creature whose chest wound slowly healed. I limped out as fast as I could, while what was once Jack paid me no mind. I made it home, and have been resting for a couple of days now. My leg is badly wounded, but I was able to stop the bleeding. I'm not sure if I want to leave the house at this point, even if it is just to get my leg treated. My friend is out there, and he's a monster, and I'm not sure where to go from here, but I will try to do some research after I post this. Now I won't be going to work for a while.